The mutant warbeasts snarled with bloodlust as they dropped onto Earth, tentacles flailing for human flesh to rend and tear. Captain Richard Evans clenched his jaw. The Benzite aliens had just made a fatal mistake. Richard was a battle-scarred veteran. He'd fought on the deadliest worlds and survived the worst the galaxy could throw at him. But nothing prepared him for this moment. General Petrov's face had been grim as he briefed Richard. A Benzite warship just warped into the solar system. They've launched drop pods, and they're not responding to hails. This is an invasion. Richard had seen Benzite handiwork before. He still had nightmares of claw marks scoring his armor, and alien screams echoing across blood-soaked battlefields. The Benzites were monsters, but now they'd gone too far. They'd brought the war to Earth. A full-scale planetary invasion would mean billions dead, cities reduced to rubble, humanity enslaved or driven extinct, unless Richard stopped them here and now. He suited up with the speed that only came from years of combat. His fighter hummed to life around him as he rocketed into the upper atmosphere. Alarms wailed. Panicked comm chatter filled the air. But Richard's eyes were fixed on the pods. They were breaking open now, and he caught a glimpse of glistening scales, razor-tipped tentacles, fanged maws that could swallow a man whole. These weren't just any aliens. The Benzites had brought their warbeasts. Monstrosities bred for slaughter with a taste for human blood. Richard had seen warbeasts shred entire platoons. He'd even fought one up close and personal. He still had the scars. Halfway through that fight, he'd realized the awful truth. One human could never beat a warbeast. But Richard wasn't alone. He was part of something greater. Every human on Earth was counting on him. He couldn't let them down. Not now, not ever. Richard armed his missiles. He'd show these alien bastards the real meaning of war. In space, no one could hear you scream. But the Benzites were about to learn a different lesson. Never drop mutant warbeasts on a human planet. Richard slammed the trigger on his cannons and missiles, pouring ordnance into the cloud of mutant warbeasts. The creatures' thick hides absorbed the impacts without slowing, and they kept coming, tentacles thrashing as they sought to rip apart human planes. Richard's squad mates fought furiously, but their weapons couldn't seem to pierce the alien flesh. "Evasive maneuvers," Richard barked into the radio. "Stay out of their reach." Just then, one of the pods broke away from the pack, hurtling on a direct course for New York City. Richard wrenched his fighter into pursuit, pushing his engines to the max. He had a missile lock. His finger tightened on the trigger, ready to blow the pod to pieces. Suddenly the pod burst open, and a war beast lunged out, slamming onto his jet. Claws screeched across the cockpit glass as the beast tried to tear its way inside, right to him. Richard jerked the stick, throwing his plane into a wild spin. The war beast clung on, jaws snapping. Richard gritted his teeth and flipped the jet into a sharp roll. The war beast lost its grip and tumbled away, ripping off a chunk of Richard's wing as it fell. Alarms screamed in the cockpit as the fighter spiraled out of control, heading straight for the city. But Richard was a veteran pilot, and he wrestled the stick, trying to pull out of the dive. As he fought to stabilize the jet, realization crystallized in his mind. The warbeasts weren't just dumb animals. This attack was too precise, too calculated. These monsters could think and plan, and that made them 1,000 times deadlier. The ground rushed up to meet him, and Richard knew he was out of time and options. He yanked the stick, angling his crippled fighter towards the heart of the pod cluster. If he could just hit them, the explosion would scatter the pods, buy some time. His thumb hovered over the ejection button. This was a one-way trip, but if it gave the evacuation precious minutes, it was worth it. The radio crackled, and a voice Richard never expected to hear again filled the cockpit. "Captain, this is Wing Commander Marcus Johnson. Spike to my friends. Heard you could use a hand." "Spike?" Richard asked, stunned. "I thought you died on Rigel 9. "Long story. Short version, I was captured, just escaped. Stole a fighter and couldn't help but notice the shitstorm brewing topside." Richard gave a strained chuckle. Some things never changed. "I have to stop those pods, but my bird is crippled." "Say no more, Captain," Spike cut in. You did your part, now let me do mine. I'll handle the pods, no arguments, spike out. Richard wanted to protest, but he was out of time. He reached for the ejection handle, hesitating for one long second before pulling it hard. The canopy blew, and the seat rocketed him clear of the doomed jet. As the chute deployed, Richard could only watch as Spike's fighter, trailing fire and debris, dove straight into the heart of the pod cluster. The massive fireball lit up the New York sky as Spike's fighter slammed into the pod cluster. Richard watched, his heart in his throat, as the explosion ripped through the alien swarm. Flaming debris rained down, and for a moment the city was still. Then Richard saw them. A handful of warbeasts, their hides scorched and smouldering, burst from the wreckage. They hit the ground running, lashing out with razor-tipped tentacles and snapping fanged jaws as they charged into the city streets. Richard's parachute jerked as he neared a rooftop. He hit hard, rolling to absorb the impact. No time to catch his breath. He shrugged off the chute and sprinted for the roof access door, his mind racing. Emergency stashes. The military had dozens scattered throughout major cities just in case. Richard kicked open the door, then ripped open the false wall inside. Jackpot. Pulse rifles, grenades, enough firepower to make even a Benzite cringe. Richard grabbed a rifle and slung a bandolier of grenades over his shoulder, slapped a fresh mag into the rifle, felt the hum of the power cell. Time to hunt. Richard charged down the stairs, taking them 3 at a time. He burst out onto the street, rifle up and scanning. A warbeast reared up in front of him, tentacles slashing. Richard didn't hesitate. He drilled a 3-round burst right into the thing's open maw. The beast's head snapped back, ichor spraying. It convulsed, then crumpled. 1 down. God only knew how many to go. Richard stalked down the street, ears straining for the telltale shrieks and growls of the warbeasts. Their scream echoed from an alley. Human. Richard sprinted towards the sound, heart pounding. He skidded around the corner to see a group of survivors pressed against a wall, eyes wide with terror. 3 NYPD officers stood in front of them, pistols barking. The shots sparked off the thick hide of the warbeast, bearing down on them. Richard didn't slow down. He charged forward, triggering a long burst into the creature's flank. The high-powered rounds punched through the scaled hide, and the beast screamed. It whirled, tentacles lashing. Richard ducked the first swipe, feeling the air rush over his head. He rolled, coming up firing. The warbeast jerked as the round stitched up its side. It took 1 staggering step forward, then collapsed, ichor pooling around it. For a moment, the only sound was the hiss and crackle of distant fires. Then one of the cops stepped forward, lowering her pistol. There was a hardness in her eyes, a set to her jaw, that told Richard she'd seen more than her share of bad days. "Sergeant Emily Reyes, NYPD," she said. "Thanks for the assist. You with the military?" Richard nodded. "Captain Richard Evans, USAF. We need to get these people to safety. There are more of those things out there." "Agreed," Reyes said. She turned to her officers. "Martinez, Cooper, get the civilians into the subway. We'll use the tunnels to evac them out of the hot zone." The officers nodded and started herding the survivors towards the nearest subway entrance. Reyes turned back to Richard. "You got a plan, Captain?" Richard grimaced. "Find those warbeasts, take them down, 1 bullet at a time if we have to." Reyes nodded, a grim smile tugging at her lips. "I like it. Simple, direct. Count me in." They moved out, Richard on point, Reyes watching their 6. They swept through the streets, picking off 2 more warbeasts as they went. The creatures were fast, deadly, but no match for the combined firepower and skills of a veteran soldier and a street-hardened cop. In a momentary lull, Richard found himself turning to Reyes. "How long you been on the force?" Reyes shrugged. 10 years, give or take. Seen some shit, but nothing like this. You? 15 years in the Air Force. Spent the last 5 fighting these bastards on a dozen worlds. Thought I'd seen it all. Thought wrong." Reyes nodded slowly. "I hear that. Never thought I'd be fighting alien monsters in the streets of my own city. Makes you wonder what else is out there." Richard started to reply, but a sudden crackle from Reyes's radio cut him off. All units, reports of a massive hostile creature in Central Park, requesting immediate backup. Richard and Reyes locked eyes. They're talking about a big one, Richard said. Bigger than any of these. We have to take it down. Agreed, Reyes said. She keyed her radio. This is Sergeant Reyes. I have military backup. We're on our way. They double-timed it towards the park, dread growing in Richard's gut with every step. Something wasn't right here. This attack, it was too coordinated, too precise. The Benzites were always brutal, yes, but this was calculated, strategic even. And that meant Fornax was pulling the strings. Richard had tangled with the Benzite commander before. He was ruthless, cunning, and utterly devoted to the destruction of humanity. If he was behind this attack, it was only the beginning. Richard gripped his rifle tighter as they approached the park. Whatever Fornax had planned, whatever his endgame was, Richard would stop him. No matter the cost. Richard charged through the park, pulse rifle gripped tight, Reyes hot on his heels. The ground shook with each thunderous step of the battling behemoths ahead. As they burst into the clearing, the sight before them stole their breath. A massive warbeast, larger than any they'd seen, grappled with a towering mechanized monstrosity. The mech was a nightmarish fusion of alien and human tech, bristling with weapons. The titans clashed in a savage dance, crushing trees, gouging earth, neither giving quarter. "What the hell is that thing?" Reyes yelled over the cacophony of twisting metal and bellowing roars. Richard's eyes narrowed. The design was eerily familiar, like something out of a fever dream, or an old science journal. "Strom," he growled. "It has to be." "Who?" "Dr. Elias Strom. Brilliant scientist but unstable. Wanted to fuse man and machine to create super soldiers. Command shut him down. He disappeared. Looks like he's been busy." As if on cue, a figure appeared on a nearby rooftop. Half man, half machine, with glowing cybernetic eyes and a tangle of wires running from his skull to the mech below. Strom. "Emily, get these people out of here," Richard roared, gesturing to the scattering civilians. "I'm going after Strom." Reyes nodded, already moving. Richard sprinted for the building, firing his grapple gun. The cable yanked him skyward, the wind tearing at his face as he rocketed up to the rooftop. He hit the roof running, charging straight at Strom. The scientist spun, his face a mix of surprise and perverse delight. "Captain Evans," he purred, his voice a metallic rasp. "I'd hoped you'd join us." Richard leveled his rifle. "It's over, Strom. Shut it down now." Strom laughed, a grating, unhinged sound. "Over? No, this is just the beginning, don't you see? This is our chance to evolve, to become something greater." Below, the mech grabbed the warbeast, metal claws puncturing thick hide. The beast shrieked, thrashing. "You're insane," Richard snarled. "This isn't evolution, it's an abomination. You're no better than the Benzites." Strom's face contorted with rage. He lunged, a blade snicking out from his cybernetic arm. Richard parried, the force of the blow numbing his arm. They traded blows, sparks flying as metal clashed against metal. Richard ducked a slash, hammered his rifle butt into Strom's face. The scientist staggered, then rallied, pressing the attack. "You're a fool, Evans," Strom hissed. "Humanity needs to evolve to survive. The Benzites understand this. I'm just finishing what they started." "By turning us into monsters," Richard countered, blocking a thrust. "By sacrificing our humanity? If we do that, we've already lost." The building shook as the battle below reached a crescendo. The mech had the warbeast in its grasp, metal talons tearing, rending. With a final defiant roar, the beast surged forward, wrapping itself around the mech. Then it detonated, a blinding flash, a roar that shook the heavens. The shockwave hit like a hammer blow, hurling Richard and Strom from their feet. Richard's head cracked against the roof. Stars burst across his vision. He struggled to rise, ears ringing, the world spinning. Through the haze, he saw Strom stagger to his feet, sparks spitting from ruptured circuitry. The scientist fixed him with a baleful glare. "This isn't over, Evans," he rasped. "I will finish my work. Humanity will evolve with or without you. Then he was gone, vanishing into the smoke and chaos. Richard dragged himself up, every bone aching, blood dripping from a dozen cuts. He stumbled to the roof's edge, looked down at the devastation below. The mech was a twisted ruin, the Warbeast a charred husk. Emily and the others were picking their way through the wreckage, shell-shocked but alive. Richard closed his eyes, exhaustion and pain washing over him. They'd won, but at what cost? Strome was still out there, and Fornax. This was just the beginning, he realized with grim certainty. The true battle was yet to come. In the aftermath of the Central Park battle, Richard stood amidst the wreckage, his pulse rifle still hot in his hands. The acrid stench of burnt flesh and twisted metal hung heavy in the air. Emily limped over, clutching a bloody gash on her arm. "Hell of a fight," she said, her voice strained but steady. "But something doesn't add up. This was too easy." Richard nodded grimly. "Fornax is playing a bigger game. This was just the opening move." As if on cue, a Humvee screeched to a halt nearby. A stern-faced colonel leapt out, his uniform crisp despite the chaos around them. "Captain Evans, Sergeant Reyes, you're needed at the Pentagon now." The Pentagon was a hive of activity, generals and analysts buzzing around like agitated bees. Richard and Emily were ushered into a dimly lit briefing room, the air thick with tension. General Petrov stood at the head of the table, his face carved from granite. "The Central Park attack was a diversion," he said without preamble. "While we were focused on the Warbeasts, Fornax raided a research facility in Nevada. He stole a prototype interstellar drive." Richard's blood ran cold. With that kind of technology, the Benzites could strike anywhere, anytime. Earth would never be safe. "We have to get it back," Emily said, her jaw set. "Agreed," Petrov said. "And we know where it is. Our intel places it on the Benzite mothership orbiting just beyond the moon." Richard leaned forward. "Let me guess. You want us to infiltrate an alien warship, fight our way to the drive, and destroy it?" Petrov's smile was razor-thin. "Exactly. You'll have a strike team of our best soldiers and scientists. But make no mistake, this is a one-way trip for most." Richard and Emily exchanged a glance. They knew the risks, the odds stacked against them, but they also knew there was no choice. "When do we leave?" Richard asked. The mothership loomed before them, a behemoth of alien metal bristling with weapons. Richard gripped the controls of his fighter, his knuckles white beneath his gloves. "Stick to the plan," he said over the comm. "Emily and I will lead the diversion. Stryker team, you get aboard that ship and find the drive." Affirmatives echoed back. Richard took a deep breath, then kicked his thrusters to full burn. The Benzite fighters swarmed to meet them, a mass of jagged edges and pulsing energy. The void lit up with the fury of their battle. Richard jinked and wove, his cannons spitting death. Beside him, Emily flew with reckless precision, drawing the aliens away from the mothership. "Stryker team is aboard," crackled the comm. "Repeat, we are—" The transmission cut to static. Richard gritted his teeth. It was up to the team now. He could only buy them time. And pray it was enough. Inside the mothership, the strike team moved with silent efficiency. They stalked the labyrinthine corridors, neutralizing Benzite patrols with ruthless precision. But the deeper they pushed, the fiercer the resistance became. Benzite warriors lunged from the shadows, their claws ripping and tearing. The strike team fought back with everything they had, but their numbers dwindled with each bloody skirmish. Finally, they reached the chamber housing the stolen drive. But as they prepared to plant the charges, a hissing laugh filled the air. "Foolish humans," Fornax said, stepping from the shadows. "Did you really think it would be so easy?" The alien commander towered over them, his form a twisted fusion of flesh and machine. His eyes glowed with malevolent intelligence. "The Warbeasts, the theft of your drive, it was all part of a greater plan," Fornax said. "My people are dying, our world ravaged by plague. This drive is our salvation, our key to finding a new home." "By exterminating us?" spat the strike team leader. If necessary, Fornax said coldly, the strong survive, the weak perish. That is the way of the universe. The Benzite lunged and the chamber dissolved into the chaos of battle. Soldiers screamed and died, Benzite and human blood mingling on the cold metal floor. And amidst it all, Fornax and the strike leader clashed in a deadly duel, a microcosm of the larger war raging beyond the hull. It was a battle of skill against brute strength, human ingenuity against alien ruthlessness, and as they fought, Richard's voice crackled over the comm. The fleet is here. Repeat, Earth reinforcements have arrived. Striker team, get out of there. But Fornax was not so easily beaten. With a snarl of rage, he activated a control on his wrist. A robotic voice echoed through the ship. Self-destruct sequence initiated. Total annihilation in T-minus 60 seconds. The strike leader looked to his team, his face grim. Go, he said. Get to the escape pods. I'll finish this. As the last of the team fled, the leader charged Fornax, a defiant roar on his lips. The two titans clashed for the final time, trading blow after thunderous blow. With a final desperate effort, the human drove his blade deep into Fornax's chest. The alien staggered, black ichor gushing from the wound. "Shayuka cannot win," Fornax gasped. "We will rise again." Then he fell and moved no more. The strike leader wasted no time. He sprinted for the escape pods, diving in just as the first explosions began to rip through the ship. In the void of space, Richard and Emily watched as the mothership tore itself apart from within. The blast wave slammed into their fighters, sending them tumbling end over end. As the debris field slowly dispersed, a single escape pod emerged, battered but intact. Richard felt a surge of relief. They had done it. The drive was destroyed. The Benzite threat ended. But the relief was short-lived. As the pod docked with Richard's fighter, he saw the strike leader emerge, his face etched with grief. In his arms he carried Emily. Her eyes were closed, her body still. "She was covering our retreat," the leader said, his voice thick with emotion. "Took a hit meant for me." Richard cradled Emily, his heart shattering. Her eyes fluttered open just for a moment. "We did it, Richard," she whispered. "We saved everyone." Then she was gone, the light in her eyes extinguished like a candle flame in the wind. The journey back to Earth was a blur. Richard moved as if in a dream, his actions mechanical, his thoughts far away. They had won, but the cost had been so high, too high. As he stood before the cheering crowds, the medals heavy on his chest, Richard felt no joy, no sense of victory. Only a yawning void where Emily had been, and the knowledge that a part of him had died with her among the stars. The scars of this war would never fully heal. The price they had paid, the sacrifices they had made, they would carry them forever. But as Richard looked out over the sea of faces, he knew that they would endure, they would rebuild, they would remember. For Emily, for all those lost, for Earth. The battle was over, but the fight would never end. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.